I'm going to call to order the January 8th, 2020 meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee at 7 p.m. in the Triton High School Library. This meeting is being audio and video recorded. I will read aloud the Triton Regional School District vision statement. We are a community of learners known for our unwavering commitment to meeting the needs of all students. Through the adoption of best practices and our active partnership with families and the wider community, who are united in supporting the development of engaged, successful, responsible, resilient learners, students will be well prepared to be ethical, empathetic, and contributing citizens. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all. All right. Kaylee, I'm assuming you're ready to go? All right, thank you.
With a new decade upon us, many are faced with the existential crisis of what is to come. However, it is currently the opposite within the halls of Triton. The 20s are back, and while it does bring interesting opportunities, the unpredictable change is readily anticipated. The real question lies in how will this be found, and at what cost to things as we know it. The holidays are officially over, and the cliche that every end holds a new beginning rings true. Parties and relaxation have been left behind. In their place is the dedication that it takes for fellow Tritonians to make one another proud to be a Viking. Sports are well underway, with students coming in early and leaving late. Practices are being held at what seems like every remaining hour of the day, especially for the hockey and track teams. Yes, yet again, our students are good at running. But despite what other schools may say, we, Triton students as a whole, not just our teams, aren't running away from our problems. Instead, we are running towards our goals. Whether it be in competition, clubs, or classes, we are all striving for better. Our latest wins have been on courses and in conference rooms, but that doesn't mean that they are not found elsewhere as well. As a whole, the student body is also looking forward to and striving for change. Student Council currently has many committees in the developmental stages, of which include challenging for additions to the curriculum, eager attempts for environmentally friendly alterations, positive pursuits for lowered parking prices, and the demolition of dated dress codes, and the spirited search for senior privileges. These, we have found, are the issues that students are most passionate about and have been passionate for the last few years. It is hoped that we all will be able to work together to fully form Triton into the environment in which both students and faculty wish to see in this new age of education. Thank you, and please ask any questions you may have.
All right, thank you, Kaylee. Very creative. Anyone have questions for Kaylee? All right. Before you leave, I just wanted to, this is no pressure on you, but I'm just making the comment as we go into budget season that the student voice is very welcome here at the table. It's something that we haven't had a lot of in the past, and I wish we would have more. So I hope just in general, with you as our student representative, that, that the student population knows that they are welcome, whether it's, you know, public comment, sending information through you, a voice through the student council, a voice through the public hearings. There are a lot of opportunities here, and I hope that the student body will take advantage of that. So thank you very much and have a great night. If you want to stay, I mean, you're more than welcome, but I'm sure you have other things going on. Thank you. All right, oral communications from the public. And seeing none, let's move on to the Student of the Month. So last year, or actually I guess now I can officially say it was 2 years ago, we started with our Student of the Month program and have had the opportunity to honor a number of students with a variety of different backgrounds for a variety of reasons. This month's Student of the Month was nominated by Sean Devenish, and hopefully he will come up and say a couple of words about why he nominated his Student of the Month. You got a mic, right? Yep, there you go.
Hello. Oh, there it is. Just in time, right? Back in September, I saw the email about nominating Students of the Month, and I immediately thought of one student. I was Kyle O'Doy, who I have had the opportunity to coach as well as work at the school with since he was in 8th grade on the freshman football team. And not only is he he still is a star athlete in 3 sports, football, basketball, and baseball. He shows great character even as an 8th grader. He started on the freshman team as quarterback, which is one of the hardest things to do as a football player. And he became a captain this year as a junior, which is another rare thing for, especially in football, a very team-based sport. But I mean, all these things are great, and he's a great student as well. And just inducted in the National Honor Society, and just won some sort of DECA competition yesterday. But one thing that stuck out to me, it was on a Friday football game before the Newburyport game, and I was down in the cafeteria assisting the special ed students I work with, and I took a look over looking at one of my students, and I saw that Kyle had invited him over to sit with the table full of football players and all of the, supposed popular kids at the time. And that's what inspired me to do this. It didn't just show how, in the school and on the field what he could do, but showed just what he was as a person. And I really respected that, and that's why I nominated Kyle. And yeah, that's
All
it.
right. Thank you very much. So Kyle, we have a nice plaque for you up here. Oh, sorry. Well, we have our smiles on.
It's just stealing stuff from me. All right. Thank you guys for coming tonight. You do not have to hang around for the rest of the meeting. All right. We'll see you then. Okay. Moving on to the consent agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda? I'll make a motion. I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? All right. Unanimous. And, all right. Oh, sorry, I apologize. I'm going to read the donations. A check in the amount of $1,700 from Tim Harris, raised through a benefit concert by Triton parents, with all proceeds going to benefit Triton Athletics, and a check in the amount of $775 sent on behalf and by request of Regina Simons through Donors Choose from a variety of donors for books to be utilized to supplement the French curriculum. All right, Chairpersons Remarks. So I'm reminding you, hopefully you all saw the emails, that we've scheduled a relatively last minute or short notice district communications meeting tomorrow. We'll get into this a little bit later in the agenda, but we've been working through the, 90 comments, I think, that DESE sent us back in December, and have pulled together a document that we're going to go through later with a lot of their commentary built into it. And due to the fact that DESE needs this kind of a finalized version back at the end of this month, and our DCC meeting for January wasn't scheduled until the 29th, and that was going to be also the primary budget discussion for January with the DCC. We felt like it was better to add an earlier meeting date with the DCC to make sure that we can address the regional agreement and give it the time that it deserves before it has to go back to DESI so that we can stay on our timeline that we've been on. Just a quick update, because we're not doing there's no state advocacy on this agenda. The fiscal year 19 supplemental budget was finally passed in December. There's $2 million of circuit breaker in there and $5.2 million of regional transportation, which will both be very welcome. We've been, I don't know if it's formal yet, but informally at least, we've been told by the Department of Revenue and DESI that they believe that even though the regional transportation in the bill was split with $2.6 million in fiscal year 19 and $2.6 million in fiscal year 20, that they're actually going to load all of that funding, the whole $5.2 million, into fiscal 20 as essentially spendable money. I don't know if is that official yet?
Yeah, no, there's been nothing official. There's been literally nothing official from DOR, DLS, or DESI. Okay. But that is, all of the reports have been, it will come through as fiscal 20 receipts for both circuit breaker and revolving or regional transportation. Circuit breaker we'd be able to access right away because it's a regional or it's a revolving account. Regional transportation is a general fund revenue, so it would have to flow through general fund revenues and be an overage that would flow through to excess and deficiency next year. Mm-hmm. Okay. But we'll take any sources of funds we can get at this point.
Yes, absolutely. The Martin Luther King Day of Service, I don't know if you've seen any of the notices coming out, but each of the schools has a set of activities that they're doing around it. So I just think that's a great thing. It's part of the grant that Julie Romano did through Youth Service America, Kim?
Why is it? Yep.
Brian? Youth Service America. So I've seen notices come out from Salisbury Elementary who are doing boxes of toiletries or bags of toiletries, and Pine Grove is doing new and gently used children's books to go out to charities. So I'm imagining Newbury Elementary and so on and so forth will have them. So there's a great set of activities going on there, and the students are actually going to get together and sort all of those one afternoon in each school, so that they'll have a hand in putting all of that together to go out to those charity organizations. And just a quick reminder that next week is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday schedule for the budget presentations, and those start at 6 o'clock. I know this trips me up every single year. So just remember that it's not our usual start time. It will be a 6 p.m. start time.
Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, yes. All right, new business? Paul?
So back in the fall, I had raised an issue about the cell phone policy, and a certain person in this room had promised me that something would come forward in January, and it's January. And so I would like to have that put on the agenda item for the next opportunity.
Okay.
And I introduced myself to Mr. Kelly tonight.
Is it the first time you've met him?
It was.
Oh, really? Okay.
And guess what I asked him about?
I was going to say, I've noticed seen it on the school council agendas. I just haven't seen anything formal come through. So.
Yeah, I know they're working on it. It's a longer discussion than they intended. I can say that to you tonight, but there will be a cell phone policy this year, absolutely.
All right.
We can put, so do you want an update in February, like from, I suppose I should look at the chair, but is that what we're looking for in February, an update from him?
I'm looking to Paul because I don't know
as far as the
exactly
process?
he's looking for.
A full-blown discussion about what's going on and what's going to happen.
Gotcha.
Okay.
You can do that.
So we get an update from the
In
principal?
February, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, are you just looking for high school, or are you looking across the district?
I think the high school would be a great place to start, but I don't know why you wouldn't want to do it across the district rather than complicate things.
So just am I on? I'm on. So the process to date was, this was a need identified through the policy review. We agreed to start with the high school. It's certainly the hotbed, if you will. So the understanding is they're working on a policy from the perspective of the high school that you would then take. They're not writing a policy for you. You would then take, and the policy subcommittee would take to draft as a district-wide policy, absolutely. So the ultimate goal is a district-wide policy. The high school is focusing on the high school specifically in their work.
Any further questions? Any other new business? All right. Moving on to reports and deliberations. Item A, you have in your packet a notification from Whittier that Joanna True's seat or term will end on March 31st. And we, as the appointing committee, need to make a reappointment for that seat prior to the expiration. This just came out within, I think, the last week and a half. My proposal to you, because my initial reaction was, we can't do anything more right now. We've just got so much other stuff going on. My proposal to you, and I'm hoping the committee will be amenable to this, is to, we normally have a 1-month acceptance date to accept letters of interest, to move that to the beginning of February. So to accept letters of interest from the beginning of February. Oh, no, wait, it ends on March 31st, Brian. We were thinking it was April 31st. Joanna True's term, remember, we talked about this a couple of times. It's March 31st, so that won't work, running February through March.
No, so you were saying. Sorry, now I'm on. So we're saying we would run it February.
Oh, that's right, sorry.
1st to
Yes.
February 28th. You would then
Yes.
make the appointment at your March
Right.
12th, 13th, whatever that
Yes.
meeting is.
Yeah, so the hope would be, yeah, right, to run it February 1st through February 28th, and then at our March, I think it's 13th, we decided, meeting to actually make the appointment, just so that during this time where we have all of these budget discussions going on, we need to get advertisements out during that point in time, we need to get communications out. Let's bump that until February, when kind of this initial flurry of meetings is done, and things start to slow down a little bit, and then we can do this right, rather than trying to get this done as soon as we're notified. So I don't know if there are any objections to that. Is that all right?
March
Okay.
11th.
So, okay, March 11th, okay. So we'll aim for doing that February 1st to February, I think it'd be the 29th is the last day of February, I believe it's a leap year, so that we can get that done. Okay, moving on to the district communications meeting, committee meeting. So the notes from the December meeting are in your packet, and also tonight in front of you and by email previously, you received the amended regional agreement with a whole set of notes and edits in here. So, real quick summary. So we contacted DESE back in December and let them know that we were ready to move on with their review process. At that point, they started pulling the history of our regional agreements, and one of the first things that they came back to me and told me was that our 2006 regional agreement was never signed by the commissioner. Yeah. So apparently this was common at that point in time, that there were just a whole set of them around that time frame that he did not sign. So I asked them, what does that mean to us? And their comment was, you're on the right track in working on this amendment and moving it toward getting it signed. Okay. So I didn't go beyond that with them because frankly, there's no reason to right now, right? We don't have anything between it would be the 1993 agreement that would be prior to that, or the 2006 agreement that's kind of pending right now. So.
All it does is elevate the importance of the work we're doing right now.
It does, yes. So, and then they came back with a slew of questions. So we've been kind of answering questions, doing a lot by email. Brian and I had a 2-hour conference call with them right after, on December 27th. So we've kind of been through this process. A lot of it was answering questions for them where they just didn't understand what we had done in the past, how things worked. We have apparently a special law in the books that we didn't know about, so we had to hunt down information to that, and special thank you to Wilma McDonald, who fortunately in her previous position as Salisbury's town clerk had literally folders of information on the 1993 version of our agreement and the whole process that they went through.
Including the special legislation.
Including the special legislation, yes. So my goal tonight is to just real quick, because I know a lot of you cannot make it tomorrow night, go through the comments that they made here. If you have feedback, I would like to take them on to the DCC meeting tomorrow night. If you're coming tomorrow night and would like to make comments yourself, I would absolutely welcome that, but I want to make sure that our view is presented tomorrow night. The agreement that you have in front of you is based on the last set of edits that were done at the DCC meeting. So we had a choice of either taking the 2006 version, taking the red lines from what work we had done, and then also include the red lines from DESI. It got really confusing when we started to do that. So we opted instead to kind of say, let's start from the last place that the DCC had agreed as kind of the base for moving forward, and let's just work on DESI's comments. A lot of DESI's comments are suggestions. They were very clear to us during the process that there are certain things that are required. A lot of them are Mass General Law references. I tried to be clear when I was making commentary in here to say whether it was a suggestion, a recommended, or per DESI, this literally has to be included type of situation. So a lot of these, we could just say, nope, we're not making the change, and that would be okay. Some of them, we have to make a change or an inclusion in here. And some of them are just thinking questions. So we'll take you through real quick. If you can start on, the pages are numbered at the bottom, so I'm going to work on those page numbers.
I was going to say, and just to clarify,
Yeah.
so you're getting the cleaned up version where Narissa just went in and made the edits.
Yes.
This is the result of probably winnowed down a third of the original comments they made once we agreed everything with DESI. That's what you're getting. So everything that's here is something we actually have to address in some capacity to say, okay, or
Yes.
make a change.
So some of these are yes or no's.
Yep.
Right? And some of these are, yes, they have to be included no matter what. And some of them are, yep, we may want to change this or we may not want to down the road. So the first note in there just says that there were a number of definitions that were made at the beginning of the agreement, saying that the district will stand in for the Triton Regional School District, that the school committee will be referred to as the committee during the document, that the towns, the Raleigh, Newbury, and Salisbury shall be referred to as the member towns. That wasn't consistent through the document, and that was one of the things that they just said, this isn't easy, clean it up. You know, it makes sense to go ahead and do that. So you'll see a lot of that happening throughout the document. Even in 1A, you'll see the powers and duties of the regional school district has been reduced to the powers and duties of the district. Not something we have to do. I think it makes sense just to kind of clean things up, but that's there. About halfway down the page, I didn't actually put a note in for this one, but this was just an MGL reference that they were requiring, and they strongly recommended, since we had to go through days of panic and a whole heck of a lot of legwork, to actually include the information on the special act that was enacted for us to do our elections the way that we do them, actually in the regional agreement, so that nobody has to go hunting for that information anymore.
One more time, say thank you, Wilma.
Yes.
Because if it wasn't for Wilma, we would have spent months searching, and I talked to her, and she said, there was a folder. Let me call Mindy and see if it's still there. The folder was still there.
Yeah.
So thank you, Wilma.
Yes. At the bottom of page 1, they noted that we have to have a note in here about appointing the district treasurer. They recommended putting it on an annual basis, but we do typically a 3-year contract for the district treasurer. So the recommendation was to put a modification in there. So part of that has to be in there. Our modification, obviously doesn't necessarily, so that doesn't have to be fully included. On top of page 2, DESI found inconsistencies in different parts of our regional agreement in some places. So formally the language said for budgetary considerations is where a 2/3 member vote was required. There are other situations in our regional agreement, for instance, closing an elementary school, where the start of that action requires a 2/3 vote. So their recommendation was to take out for budgetary considerations and put in either by law, so what MGL requires, or as stipulated elsewhere in this regional agreement, so that the bylaw will cover, any budgetary considerations if it's a fiduciary responsibility, right? We have to have a 2/3 vote, and it'll let the rest of the agreement govern where that 2/3 vote has to happen in other matters, instead of us trying to cover that here in this particular item. Under section E, votes and governance, the DESI found this section to be very confusing. So part of
redundant.
it's just, they kept saying to us, you need to look at this not like you've been looking at it for years. You need to look at it like you're someone new reading the regional agreement, someone who maybe new on the school committee, or maybe a new selectman for your towns who has never seen this before and come at this like you literally from scratch just started looking at this document, because there are sections in there that don't make sense. When you're accounting for history, they do. When you're just looking at the document itself, they don't. So their recommendation was to remove part of the top part that talks about, you know, kind of the history of why our votes are the way that they are. They also question the use of the word programs. There's no definition of programs in the regional agreement. There's no definition of programs in DESI's documentation. So there were places, a number of places in here where programs were used, and this was one of the major places. And they said, try to clarify where, you know, exactly what you mean when you're talking about where that 2/3 vote is required, and exactly what you're trying to kind of protect as far as requiring the additional number of votes. This is just some sample language that's in here. This doesn't have to be what stays, but we need to have some sort of clarification in here. This was pulled from the way that a number of other regional agreements stipulate where that 2/3 vote is required. In the next section, that starts, oh, that's a place where I missed the Regional District School Committee. I'll take that out. Where it takes out second tier and in accordance with MGL Chapter 71, Section 59. This was actually a section that was going to be added from the 2006 agreement. Tracing it back, it looks like it was something that Superintendent Farmer had suggested at the time. DESI said there's no definition of second tier, and that the MGL Chapter 71 actually defines which administrators were responsible for appointing. So their recommendation was to take second tier out and take the other MGL reference out, and just let Chapter 71 in itself denote which positions should fall under this, this section of the regional agreement. Moving on to page 3. This was another one where they were worried about confusion. So there was a section in here that said the students shall essentially attend their hometown schools, except in cases of emergency as defined by the Regional District School Committee. There was no definition of emergency by the Regional District School Committee anywhere we can find. It's not in our policies, can't find it in manuals anywhere. It simply doesn't exist. One of their comments was, the superintendent will know when you see an emergency. Like, there's a pretty common concept of what the emergency would be that would require you to send students from one town to a school in another town. So their recommendation was just to remove that as defined by the Regional District School Committee clause. And I'm going to pause here and say, like, I'm just going to keep talking, but if you have questions, comments, or anything on one of these sections, please raise your hand or, you know, get my attention, and we'll address it as we go. They were also concerned about how specific we were with special education low incidence classes and regional magnet classes. So they recommended changing that to district-wide, just to say that where there's a need for a district-wide sort of situation where there's one program, for lack of a
ASD
better word.
program,
Yeah, an ASD program, whatever it happens to be in one elementary school, that would be a situation that's a exception to the rule, and that's perfectly fine to have in here. They just recommended it be broader. And or inter-district school choice in accordance with district policy. So they raised that question because inter-district school choice also wasn't defined in the regional agreement, and it's not defined, I don't think it was defined in MGL. I believe that's
It's not a thing.
It's not a thing, exactly. But it is defined
It's
in
only
our
important
policy.
for regions.
But didn't we in our policy have that? I remember when Sandy was here yet.
Yeah, so
I was
it's,
gonna
that
say
discussion. So
That's
that's
the
in the
one
policy
place we
manual.
could find
Okay.
it, yeah.
All right.
So they recommended adding in accordance with district policy because that will specifically reference them back to the policy manual to get that definition of what
right,
that
because
is.
it morphed from Dr. Murphy to Halloran to Christopher Farmer, that it didn't exist to intra-district choice exists, because how can we not let our resident students have the same rights of out-of-district residents? But as long as we reference policy, you get continued to determine the policy.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of this, it was, I guess, housekeeping work, I'd almost consider it, but it's good to have it in there. I mean, I think it's,
It was literally when they said, okay, so picture yourselves picking this up, someone else picking this up 20 years from now when you're all long gone. That's how it needs to be read, so no one can misinterpret the language. And we were doing, I think you've written in your notes, a lot of just cleaning up existing language versus saying, how can we rewrite this for 2020?
Exactly. In section C, they recommended changing all the town of shall make the land and building, updating those to be the town of shall continue to make the land and building, just so it's updated into present tense sort of situation. They also made a note that we have specifically in here a note about if the town of Salisbury leaves the district, Salisbury Elementary gets turned back over to the member town. In theory, we're leasing all of the elementary schools as the district. So they said it shouldn't just be Salisbury. In the case of withdrawal, it should be any member town, their elementary school gets turned back over to them. So they recommended broadening that out to make sure that it includes all the member towns rather than just Salisbury. In the next section down, under section 5, A, classification of costs, we had previously had the landlord-tenant section in the next section down under elementary schools. They were confused by that because it almost looked like it was a definition of what kind of a capital cost it was. So it looked like we had secondary school capital costs, elementary school capital costs, and landlord-tenant capital costs. Definitely not the case there. So they recommended not making that its own section, and moving it up into the classification of cost section, because that does have to do with those basic classifications of costs. So that's just a move. Nothing changed there other than removing the header. On page 4, under the elementary schools section, we went through a significant amount of time with them explaining about how capital costs are handled, in particular in relation to the elementary schools. Their recommendation was to put a note in here just to say that while the town of Salisbury's debt for Salisbury Elementary School is included in our budget, so we're paying it, effectively, right? It's a pass-through, that the town of Salisbury is still responsible for payment of that debt.
Nerissa, can I just ask, when is that loan due? Isn't that
I think,
this year?
yeah.
That's what I thought. Okay, thanks.
That's why we can have the discussion about technically transferring ownership back to Salisbury,
Right. Thank you.
or as of next year.
Next item down, they suggested that we add a third category of capital costs in here district-wide. Given that there has been significant volatility with transportation contracts, there are a number of school districts that are looking at owning their fleet of school buses, or at least part of their fleet of school buses. And there is no capital cost category that falls in here. When we were talking to them, one of the things they said was, you don't need a lot of this, but it's good to have it for down the road, so that if something comes up, you're covered. You're not worried about, how do we handle this? It's not in our regional agreement, and you're not having that discussion at that point. So while we don't own our buses right now, or any equipment on that district-wide basis that is talked about in here, and there's no intent, I mean, it's not like we...
I was going to say, can we just clarify, we are not one of those districts
Yes,
interested
we're
in
not.
owning buses, period.
This is a just-in-case sort of scenario. If down the road we wanted to do something like that, there's a mechanism for doing it. So this adds in district-wide, and then you'll also see that in Section D, the apportionment of capital and operating costs, the addition of the term and district-wide capital costs in here, they're as in the same category as secondary school as far as the way it's apportioned, so that it's very clear how that would be handled. Again, something we can take or leave. Anything that we were in a situation where we're like, oh, that kind of sounds smart, but we can take it or leave it, we put it in because it's, we wanted that sample language in there so that people would know exactly what could be put in, and we're not making up language on the spot or trying to sub things in as we're going through it. Also in Section D down there, one of the things that they brought up as far as all of our apportionment is it uses something called the total student enrollment. There is no such thing. So they recommended that we put in exactly what we are using, which is the foundation enrollment. And then there was some redundancy in there. So you'll see things like striking and each town paying said percentage of the amount so approved. So that's struck. On page 5, you'll see similar things happening, striking total student enrollment and inserting foundation enrollment. They also recommended that we add a total assessment statement down the bottom. So you'll see that it talks about capital costs and then operating costs, but it kind of never gets to that total. So they recommended just putting in some language down there that says the total assessment is the sum of those two numbers. And that number is the number, of course, that then gets passed on to the towns as part of the requirement under Mass General Law.
So again, just to confirm, that's the way we do it?
Yep.
The towns and the warrants, you always notice it's their operating plus their capital, so there's no change here, it's just codifying it.
Yep, exactly. Under E, they asked us to reflect Mass General Law, or told us to reflect Mass General Law by adding by the district treasurer to denote who is certifying the apportionments to the towns. The next section down, section 6A, is just,
Semantics.
yeah, it's semantics. It's taking the whole Department of Elementary and Secondary out and putting DESE in. They recommended, in the spirit of lots of different towns and cities going to a gender-neutral board system, that we get ahead of that, and rather than having chairman still in our comments, that we update it to be chairperson, regardless of whether our towns have gone that direction or not, just to get ahead of that. They also recommended, since 2 of our towns have town administrators instead of town managers, that where there was town manager in this contract, or in the agreement, we also put a town manager/administrator in there. Section B is, comprehensive budget.
It was just,
Trying to see what, I'm trying to remember what this is.
so we had that what was struck was just duplicate.
Oh, yes.
And
Yep.
then the added language about the 2/3 vote is just required to be in this section.
That's right, that's an MGL.
So just an MGL.
I'll add the note in there. Okay. Under section C, they were confused by net budget because, again, there's no such defined thing. They recommended just striking that, since we're very clearly in the process of developing that, the total budget here, which is what that refers to. Section 7 and section 8. Section 7 is insurance. They said this should go in a lease agreement, and we said, well, we don't have a lease agreement yet.
What a great idea. We think so too.
Yes. So they recommended that we just make a note that down the road, when there is a lease agreement, hopefully at some point, that the insurance section should actually go in that section. And section 8, and then I should say, and then that would be removed from the regional agreement and be strictly part of the lease agreement. Section 8, indemnity, they said there's nothing illegal about having this in here. It's not something that they typically see in regional agreements, and they don't understand what the reason is for having it in here. It's not a necessary part because it's just standard. So they kind of said, well, why don't you take it out? And we were like, well, but we might get a little pushback on it. Like, I can see people wanting to leave this in. So we're just putting it out there and saying, DESE said it's not standard. It's not something we have to have. And we're legally covered anyway, even without it. But if it needs to stay in there, it needs to stay in there. It is what it is. That's because a lot of it, like they said, if you want to remove it, go ahead and remove it.
The reality is the district only exists by the vote of the 3 towns.
Right.
There's no agreement with this entity called the district. The district is what's created by this document. So.
Yeah. Under section 9, transportation, they requested that told us that we need to add a section in there just referring back to the calculation that's made in the apportionment section. So that's been added. On page 8, there are 2 different items that you'll see in here, both per Mass General Law. The amended process is not complete until the Commissioner of DESE signs off on the amended agreement.
Relevant.
Yep, very relevant. And there's also a requirement by Mass General Law that if you're going to admit an additional town to your district, the commissioner has to approve it by December 31st, and it has to happen on July 1st. So commissioner approves first, December 31st, it happens on the following July 1st. It's not something that the towns can determine the timeline for having a district being admitted. it's already covered.
Similar to transportation, we don't have any suggestions for admitting other towns to the region.
Yes, yeah. No, absolutely not. So, page 9, at the top of the page, they very strongly suggested adding a section in here about liabilities. So I don't know which district it was, but they made it sound like there was a district that was burned by a town that withdrew and left the district with all of the OPEB liability, because it's not covered as part of a withdrawing district, so, or withdrawing town. So that town basically left the towns remaining in the district with all of the OPEB liabilities. Their recommendation was to put language in here. This one is pulled from, I think, Hamilton 1, if I remember correctly, to say that as part of withdrawing towns, a part of the stipulations around a town withdrawing, that OPEB needs to be included in there, and any other pension-related liabilities, that type of thing. Under Section B, procedure, this goes on down into the process of a town withdrawing. They recommend, or required actually, that we put in that the member towns have to accept that as a majority vote at town meetings. And also that timing thing again, where the commissioner has to approve it by December 31st, and then the withdrawal happens on the following July 1st. At the bottom of Section 9, under item D, payments of certain capital costs, they noted that that $5 million number for the bank requirement goes back to our 1993 agreement, and that times have changed. When I was looking at some of the more updated agreements that I have, they still list that $5 million number, so clearly we're not an anomaly for still using that in modern times. But they just questioned that. They said, is this something you want to consider? Do you want to leave this here, or do you want to increase that number?
I have a question about that, Narissa, because when I read that, and knowing that it came from 93,
Yes.
so you're not finding that there are other districts that have increased that, correct?
The ones that I specifically looked at, so I looked at Hamilton Wenham, which was a 2015. I looked at Spencer East Brookfield, which was 2017. Berlin Boylston, which was 2019. I think there was one other that I looked at, and all of those still had it at the $5 million number. But it could be, so Michelle Griffin with DESE, so Christine Lynch has been doing regional
forever.
agreements at DESE for years. She's in semi-retirement, so I don't know exactly what her work schedule is, but she's in a couple of days a week. More times than not, when I email her, I get an out-of-office reply. Michelle Griffin, who had worked in that office previously, I think she had said it 6 years ago, she left that office and moved elsewhere in DESE. She has been back there since June. This was a Michelle comment, so she's clearly seeing things that probably, I think they were catching things. I mean, when we looked down, we could see what Christina commented and what Michelle had commented in the original document that they sent us, and that was a Michelle comment. I think it's just probably she's seeing it with new eyes and saying, this doesn't necessarily make sense, because she's, only been back and doing this for 6 months, basically.
Well, as I said, when I read this this week, that's one thing that I think maybe we might want to look at a little bit more closely and see if we do need to make an adjustment. Maybe we don't.
Yeah.
If the majority aren't, but I don't know. That's a big time shift.
Yeah. Oh, it is.
So nobody has made the change to the number, but is there any guidance on what Bessie thinks the number should be?
No, they didn't give us any guidance.
So this is talking about where the money from the withdrawing district town would go, that the district holds on to. So it's really a protection for that town's money. And I think since 93, you hear the FDIC insured or mass deposit, MMDF, which is actually a much higher funding level or protection level than the FDIC. I don't remember the levels, but all of our funds that Amy's managing through Bartholomew are mass depositors, which is a much higher level than FDIC or this. But I do think this is still the standard. We can do some more research to see if that's the standard. But I think it's really only about the protection of the money once it comes from the town to the district. It's not about an amount to be given, or it's not affecting the amount that the town is giving, which is why I think people don't spend a lot of time looking at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can do a little work.
Okay, moving on to section 10. They recommended updating all of the pupils, which they said was an outdated term, despite their continued use of it, to the word students instead. And they just noted that under the vocational and trade school section, that there are other situations that where the costs are basically determined, who bears the costs are determined by Mass General law rather than anything that our regional agreement would note. So they just suggest that we put in there or otherwise determined by law. On section 15, we had quite a conversation about the communication committee because it is unique to us. Other districts have like a budget committee, but there's really, it seems like nothing like we have going on here. They just suggested we in between the 2006 agreement and what we had last agreed in the DCC, we had changed the chairmanship to be either the chair of the school committee or the chair of one of the member towns' board of selectmen. They said, well, how do you decide who the chair is? And we said, well, it just is on a rotating basis, and they said put it in the agreement. So that suggestion was in there to put in the agreement, and then they just suggested clarifying the members a little bit. So you'll see that there are some there's a little bit of update in the language there, just to make sure it's really clear that it's one select person, at least one select person, at least one finance committee member, and so on, just so that it's really clear how that's done. Incurring of debt. So this is something that we have to change. There were a couple of different sets of language that we could use to change this. Specifically, it does have to reference, under incurring of debt, there's two different ways you can do it. It has to reference either Chapter 71, Section 16D or Chapter 71, Section 16N. We have typically used Chapter 71, 16D in the past, so that's what's reflected here in the language. They also require, in the past, our language just said that the debt would be authorized, and then we'd notify the Board of Selectmen. They require that we have a language in here about a town meeting vote, either having to happen or the waiver period in which, if a town meeting doesn't happen, the incurring of debt is considered to be approved. So that language is in there. They gave us, I think, 4 different samples on language on incurring of debt. We can go back on another one if there's any problem with this language, but this seemed to best match what we're doing in the district right now, and I haven't heard any concerns raised about the way we're doing it in the district. So we just basically chose the way that matched as closely as possible. On the bottom of page 11, section 17, application of state and federal grants. So this was an interesting one. They said, first of all, this is not a standard part of an agreement. The application of state grants is handled by Mass General law, so it's not something that we have to have in our regional agreement. The federal aid section, there apparently used to be a military installation on Salisbury Beach, and they used to kick in extra federal aid directly to the district because there were students essentially stationed as part of that military installation. So that closed back in the 90s.
That's what I couldn't believe, is that this was like the final cleanup was in 93, 94.
Yeah. Yeah. So they said we don't receive that aid anymore, so we're fully legal with
We're going to try and get some.
striking this
We're
section.
going to look for it.
Yeah.
Without opening the base.
So they said, state, you don't need to have it in there because it's already covered under Mass General law. Federal aid doesn't apply anymore, so that whole section can just be removed from the regional agreement.
Can I just say in that, so the other question was with state grants.
Yep.
Anticipating the question from towns, well, we want to make sure that state grants, offset costs that we wouldn't otherwise be assessed. Every state grant we get comes with very, very strict guidelines about how they're used and for what purposes and how they're allocated and how they're expended and requested. So that's all covered under law, and the towns are well protected that will always offset their costs.
All right. Page 12, top of the page, this is just an update to make it modern language again. Instead of shall include, or it shall be extended to include, something that was happening in the past, it shall include now all those, all the grades. And
Just as an aside, if you're
Yeah.
looking for.
Oh, pupils,
edits,
thank you.
pupils there.
kind of like pupils. Sounds official and old.
Thank you. Yeah, obviously, there's still a few updates to be made here. I'll add in a couple extra comments, probably, maybe even after tomorrow night, because I think it's fairly easy to explain a lot of them. So, other than what we've already covered, questions, comments going into tomorrow night? Any opinions on any of this? I mean, we tried to do our best to kind of make this as straightforward as possible, so.
Thank you, Narissa, for spending all the time and doing this. I know how labor-intensive that can be. And I like the idea of looking at this with fresh eyes, because I like the part of the budget, particularly because it does explain how and why the towns are assessed the way they are, so that somebody who is looking not only at this regional agreement, but looking at the budget, would know that those two are tied together. So I thought our piece about missing the, that one section about the foundation enrollment, clearing that up,
Yes.
was great. I'm glad to see it.
Well, I can say too, I mean, we ironed out a fair amount of this and obviously put this document together, but Michelle and Chris did so much work on this. I mean, I know they have at least one other regional agreement going at the same time, and they've been working back and forth between the two different groups. And I mean, just phenomenal amount of work that they put into this as well. Like I said, the original, I think we had close to 100 comments in the original.
It was, yes.
It was. And some of that was just explained. We could literally say, oh, this is how our DCC works. This is why it's written that way. You know?
To the point where I'll admit, Debbie Downer, the first time I read it, I
Yes.
emailed her, so I'm like, oh my gosh, this is dead on arrival. There's no way. And then when you unpack it slowly over time, you realize, okay, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
There it is. I came clean.
Do you have comments? Anybody else?
I just have a quick, thank you for all the work you put into it. I just wanted to ask, have you had response from the towns? Do you know if everybody will be represented tomorrow?
Yes, they will all be represented. I wouldn't have confirmed that date if we hadn't been able to get
Oh, okay.
everyone there. So, yeah, I've got somebody from at least every Board of Selectmen and Finance Committee. Neil will be there. I don't believe Tracy will be.
Yeah.
So, but,
Okay.
you know, that will give us all the Board of Selectmen represented in all the finance committees, so.
And so what's the timeline on this? I know
Yep.
we're going to, can you just kind of review where we're at with the timeline?
Yes, so we have to have this back to DESI in a finalized version for their final legal review, so they have to pass it through and make sure everything that is, you know, I's dotted, T's crossed, all that stuff. Before we put a final vote for this to be able to literally start the process of it being passed on to the member towns for inclusion in the warrants. So the goal is to have the meeting tomorrow night to go through the majority of the language. We'll bring a final, hopefully, version of the regional agreement with any changes from tomorrow night incorporated in it to the DCC meeting on the 29th. Depending on what comes up from tomorrow night, we may add a small business item into one of our intermediate meetings, since we have 3 in the middle, to just cover anything unanticipated that may come up. But that final January 29th DCC would be the date to kind of finalize what's coming out of the DCC and the school committee. It will go back to DESI. DESI anticipated that they will need a few weeks to do their legal review and get back to us on that. Once they get back to us, we'll do a final vote. So I'm anticipating that will probably be at our March meeting, along with the final budget when we vote that through, that mid-March meeting. At that point, once we send it on to the towns, they literally start, my understanding from, because I said to them all, what do you need from me? And they said, the final red line version of the agreement. So I'm assuming that because their legal counsel, I understand, primarily puts together the warrants for the town meetings. I believe their legal counsel will take that red line version and actually find the exact language that needs to be included in the warrants. At that point, we had talked with advocacy about doing in the way that we did the budget listening sessions, actually including this in there as well, so that as we're going around to the towns, if people have questions, if they have comments, you know, at that point, let's have that explanation out there so that this isn't blindsiding people at town meeting. And then the town meetings will happen. Once that's approved, it looks like it, in some cases, is taking up to 2 months for the commissioner to sign it. So we get all 3 of our town meetings, get all the signatures on here, send this into DESI, commissioner signs it, and then we're good to go.
And It has to be approved by all 3 towns, correct?
Has to be approved by all 3 towns and by the commissioner. Yes,
Simple majority, all 3 towns.
simple majority, yes. And we have to start the process
Okay.
based on our vote. So that's where we're at. I'm hoping that we can stick to that schedule.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, if something happened with timing and you didn't make the March meeting, you still have the April meeting.
Yep.
Your vote just has to occur before the first town meeting,
Yes.
right? So if we missed the agenda for the March 11th meeting and you didn't get to vote it, but it came back from DESI on March 20th, and it all looked good to go, we could submit it to the towns. They could, because they need it for their budget warrant process, or their town meeting warrant process, get that rolling, knowing it's good with DESI legal, and then we could put it on the April, whatever that is, 12th, 14th agenda, as long as you're taking a vote after the legal review and before the town meeting occurs, not before they start printing their warrant.
But that's still enough time for them to get it on their warrants?
They actually said,
Some towns,
When I-
some of them meeting in
yeah.
April?
when I was talking to, the goal would be to have this to them ahead of time, saying, this is the final version, we know we're going to take a vote, right? So they would start including it.
I see.
Yeah, as part of the process. And I had responses from, I talked to Cliff, and then I had emailed with Neil. I think I had talked to Tracy in between, just to say, like, tell me what you need, tell me what the process is, that type of thing. And yeah, I mean, they were ready to start with the red line version we already had, which is obviously going to change substantially, I think, for the better, as we're going through this process. But at this point, they know to hold off and wait, because this is, now what we're focusing on. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Any other comments or questions before tomorrow night? All right. Excellent. Thank you all. And if you can come tomorrow night and put in your 2 cents, great. If not, I'll try and put in 2 cents for all of us, based on what I heard here tonight. Reports and deliberations, item C, fiscal year 21 budget projections, Brian?
So can we just take the curriculum update out of
Yeah.
order? I'd actually meant to have done that early on, because we
That's
have
why
Anna
Anna's here.
Bates
I
joining
didn't even
us.
put that together. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
And as we started, I looked and I'm like, oh yeah, I was going to do that, and it was too late to interrupt. But if we can swap that around and have Kim and Anna take that agenda item at this point, does that work?
Yeah.
Are you ready to roll?
I'm ready to roll.
All right.
Ian, do you want to come up here?
Push a button if you're going to talk. You don't push it too close.
That's right. We
at
did. We
that.
coordinated our colors.
Good job, guys.
You had to get your own mic. So tonight, we're going to just give you a quick update on some of the new programs that have been implemented. Actually, most of these programs have been implemented over the last 2 to 5 years. So previously in the fall, we were able to give you an update through the assessment, but I think it's also really important to give you an update regarding professional development, some of the areas that we're still working through, as well as some extension activities that we have been able to develop over the course of a couple of years. So I will start with the math. Just as everybody is aware, we have implemented Math in Focus about 5 years ago. In fact, they actually have a new version out right now that is the new and improved model, if you would. We are currently looking over some of the materials and the standards and the progression of the standards to see what the difference is between our current edition. We have kindergarten over at Pine Grove piloting some of the lessons, as well as 5th grade over at Salisbury. We are not ready to make any recommendation whether to upgrade our model to the newest edition. We will be pulling all of the math specialists and the original curriculum math team together to have them kind of unpack the new resource and see what it looks like, compare it to what we currently have, and then see if it is needed. But you will hear back regarding that particular meeting, I would say by next month. As far as some of the things that I think are new and exciting, other than the new edition of the program and the fact that we do have a couple of teachers who are piloting it, we are in the process of developing some procedures and some processes to identify kids who are accelerated in some of their mathematical learning and the concepts attached to that. So we're looking at different pathways as they come up to the middle school and then extended to the high school. In addition to us taking a look at it, actually the timing is perfect because the colleges and the state is also looking at some of the different mathematical pathways that people are developing within their schools to make sure that there are no gaps and that students are getting the content that they need to be successful in career and college. One of the things that they are trying to prevent is that we have these accelerated pathways and then kids are graduating and going into calculus and other advanced math classes with many gaps in their mathematical concepts. So they've taken a step back and they've done a lot of research and had some higher level discussions with the universities and the colleges. And so I just recently went to a director's meeting where that was the focus of the meeting. So some really exciting information coming from that we will also be unpacking at that curriculum meeting that is scheduled for this month. The other thing I just wanted to draw your attention to is as we continue to strengthen our practices during the school day, we also have many dedicated teachers, and I just want to put a plug out there for the math specialists who, even at point 5, are working over and beyond and doing things that really extend their day and are at a great benefit, not just for the students, where there's a lot of enrichment activities, but also PD for the teachers. So I just want to put a shout out for them for their continued dedication, even though, you know, the expectation is not that they put in 15 hours a day, but they put in 15 hours a day. So are there any questions with that particular update with math? If not, we can move on to Anna.
No questions?
All right.
All right, so as far as science goes, since the new standards, I keep calling them new, they're not new anymore, they were adopted in 2016. We were able to implement Inspire Science in K through 2 and STEM Scopes in 3 through 8 in 2017. And then last year, the biology teachers updated their curriculum materials to a newer version of a Pearson product called Miller and Levine. So huge updates between, I believe it was 2003 was their last edition, and then this one, which has a lot of sort of online components and some simulations that students can do online. So they're using that this year as well. All 3 of these programs are either based on NGSS or the Massachusetts framework, which is also based on NGSS. So very sort of similar bases for both programs and approaches. So what's going on besides the new curriculum materials? We transitioned to a new platform in STEM Scopes, which is fully aligned with the Massachusetts standards now. It's also better aligned with our own technology, as everything is editable in Google. The feedback from teachers so far has been very, very positive. All curriculum maps in K through 8 have been updated with to reflect the new curriculum and the standards. Each school has curriculum teams that focus on science that meet at different times throughout the year. It really varies by school. At the middle school, the science teachers meet monthly. The high school, they meet weekly. And then they meet sort of at varying times throughout the year at the elementary schools. I am able to support a lot of those meetings too, so I attend them and help kind of troubleshoot problems and offer support when they need it. Let's see. Last spring, I was able to meet with a representative from science, grades 3 through 8 from each school. And this group came together. They mapped out their curriculum. They identified common assessments that they wanted to implement this year. And we'll be getting together this spring to revisit that, see how implementation is going, make any adjustments that we need to, and take a look at those common assessments. So that group is going to continue to meet. We also have had science teachers in grades 5 through 8 who have been participating in curriculum collaborations throughout the year. They sort of look at how each domain is taught in each year and how does that spiral up or spiral back. And then we're also participating in peer observations. So we have the teachers sort of offering to open up their classrooms and have a whole group come in and observe a lesson with a focus on the implementation of the science practices, which are also part of the standards. We have one of those coming up next week, actually, and the program coordinator from the high school is going to be attending that as well. We're going to be going down to Newbury Elementary to see 2 science lessons so that he can sort of bring the science department from the high school into that process as well. I think that's been very positive. And then we also have some extensions and some enrichment activities that are taking place at schools related to science. There are maker spaces throughout the district. There, some teachers and schools are doing engineering Fridays where they'll do an engineering design challenge and to come bring in some of those engineering standards. And we have some STEM-related after-school programming. We have been able to bring the STEM fair back this year. We've changed it from the science fair, but to the STEM fair. It is going to be, this year it's for grades 7 through 9. We have a small group of students who are participating in that, but are being led by 2 very dedicated teachers. And they're preparing right now their proposals for their projects for their regional fairs, which will be coming up in the spring. And that's about it. Are there any questions about science?
Questions? Oh, I see lots of people going for the green buttons. Linda, you want to go first?
I think this is wonderful, the work that's being done, that the teachers have done. I have a question about the online stuff. Is the online for teachers to get information for the students, or is it for the students going online to do any type of work?
So we have both teacher and student licenses. The Pearson program for biology is fully compatible with Google Classroom, which all of the teachers are using anyway, so it syncs up directly. We also have hard copies of the textbooks that are available that are, some students can take them and they can also be dispersed amongst classrooms throughout the school. So no one's without because they don't have access to the technology. But I think it certainly enhances instruction when you can provide students with access to simulations in a lab setting that we can't actually bring them into. So that's, I think, has been positive. But so it's both students and teachers.
All right, excellent.
And I just wanted to make a comment to speak to the piloting of the science program, especially at Pine Grove and kindergarten, because I have a kindergartner this year and I didn't realize that the program was being piloted. And, you know, they send home what they do. And I was thinking, like, they learn so much more than we ever learned in kindergarten. I'm like, and they're doing science already? I mean, my son's already coming home to me with concepts that I'm like, how do you know this? We did not have this conversation. So I just wanted to comment and speak to that. I think that the curriculum is working because he's really excited in particular for science and math. And I see that they're already doing that in his class. So that's really wonderful.
That's good to hear.
Thank you.
That's great.
Maureen?
I just wanted to ask about the 9th grade biology. If I remember correctly, we had a discussion last year during the budget season that the textbooks were really outdated. Were those updated this year?
Yes. So it's the same platform. It's the same program. But we went mostly online but we're able to supplement with about 25 hard copies of the textbook. So those books that were crumbling and falling apart are no longer.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you.
Deb, and then Paul?
No, go ahead.
It's just a comment. I had a parent from Salisbury Elementary who has a student who's on a 504 plan who told me how wonderful that the STEM program, STEAM program has been for him.
Great, good. Thank you. That's great.
So I just really have a big shout out to the math and the science departments. Both of my daughters are in college now, and a recurring theme that I've heard again and again is how well prepared they seem to be as opposed to their colleagues in their respective classes, calculus, math, biology. I just wanted to share that.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll pass that on. That's good feedback.
Any other comments or questions? I have one on the science. Anna, could you just address a little bit about transitions, both from the early K through 2 program and then also from going from grade 8 up into the high school science programs and how those are working? Is there like a transition process in between those? Are there gaps that teachers are covering at all?
So the K through 2 program is based on the NGSS standards, which are, at that level are almost identical to the Massachusetts standards. So although they're transitioning programs from Inspire to STEM Scopes, which at the time when the committee was meeting felt like it was a better fit developmentally for students at each grade level. They're changing programs, but they're still addressing the standards as they spiral up. And both are also based on a 5E model of inquiry, so they're following that same pathway. So I don't see that transition between grade 2 and 3 being that big. In moving from grade 8 to 9, it changes a little bit because they're being taught science from an integrated approach up to grade 8, where they're getting all domains of science within one science class, and then they move just to biology in 9th grade using a different program. There's quite a bit of communication between the content leader at the middle school and the program coordinator at the high school, and we're also working to try and get them more involved in some of these activities, such as the peer observations, in addition to the conversations that they're already having, so that everybody's more prepared, and it's not so much of a transition for students.
I have one last question. I have heard the elementary school science fairs spoken of with much nostalgia. Is there any chance that those are coming back at some point?
We'd like to.
I would like to think so. Yeah, we actually had a hard time getting coordinators for the science fair over the past couple of years. So this year they were, I think both are have committed to doing this, and they're doing a great job, but they could not take on coordinating a fair across all of the schools. I'm hoping that we can grow it.
And this is the first year that they're actually using a different kind of platform, and the program is entirely different. So I would imagine that after this pilot year, they will branch out, and that's the hope. But I have to say, it is getting to be a challenge, because all of the teachers their schedules are full. I mean, there's a lot of after-school activities and programs and meetings that people are attending. So, but we certainly hope that will be the direction that we will be going. Okay. Yeah. And I also just want a quick shout out to Anna. One of the most powerful things that I saw over the course of the last 3 years with the science is the opportunity for teachers to go in and observe classrooms, and not just classrooms that are within a high school or a middle school, but when you have middle school teachers going down into the elementary school to see what is happening, some of them have never even stepped foot in the elementary school. So it really opened up a lot of conversation about student learning and expectations that was very powerful and has received a lot of momentum. And I want to also just say part of that is because of Anna's approach to the situation of getting colleagues in, observing each other in a non-threatening but collaborative way. So thank you.
Do you see that as a model for?
Oh, right.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
Just thinking if it works so well for science, right?
Yes.
All right. Any other questions? Comments? All right. Well, thank you two for coming tonight. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Anna.
Kim, you have to stay.
She said thank you too for coming.
All right. That puts it back on you, Superintendent Forget, for the budget discussion.
Peace enough.
Please.
We're back to fiscal 21 budget discussion. Obviously, we're not as much focused on projections at this point as we are looking at the actuals for next week. So at this point, we are still on track to get to you all the documents by Friday for next Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night's presentations. Again, elementary's on Tuesday night, middle school, high school, and athletics on Wednesday night, and the rest of the district stuff on Thursday night. It will likely be shorter meetings because we're not doing school improvement plans, but I think spreading it over 3 nights maybe makes them shorter, more palatable meetings, and gives us plenty of opportunity and plenty of opportunity to ask questions of the principals about their proposals and push and dig deep on what the needs are. I will say, as we're always blaming Dave, but it's not Dave's fault. He's got thick skin. Special education has continued to be a driver for us, as you know. We actually are looking at, we're not talking numbers tonight, tonight, but the trend is looking positive with some age outs, as well as some recouping some circuit breaker costs for some really high-cost students this year. So actually, for the first time in a little while, it's looking like, as Dave's wrapping up his budget package, he's got a little more, a little more uptick on the grin than he usually has, the frown, as he's trying to make numbers work. So, so that's a positive trend. Again, we're still going to go into next week looking at new costs, right? We're talking about the needs of the schools and the district. We'll then, by the Saturday, the 25th, which is your workshop, have hopefully some additional pieces of information that will be a little more concrete. The transportation, the student school bus transportation, again, this is yellow regular day buses, went out on the street on the 2nd of January. There's a pre-bid meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m., and then the bids will be open 2 weeks from tomorrow, which is the 23rd, correct? So that means that when we walk into the workshop on Saturday morning, we'll at least know what the transportation figure is. There are districts seeing 20, 30% increases in their transportation costs. We're not anticipating that, just based on our conversation with the current vendor. There could be a vendor that even beats our current vendor, which, the lower the cost, the better. But just given where we are with the cost of fuel from when we bid 5 years ago, we're looking like it may not be that massive increase that we were fearing. But we won't know for 2 weeks. The other unknown piece is obviously we're negotiating both the teachers and the instructional assistants contracts. We're not going to have any concrete information on that for some time, but I think by that Saturday, we're going to have to make some decisions in regards to what we want to use in regards to a pot of funds for a placeholder for that, because we need to then, from the 25th, be able to have a high water mark for February 12th. So I would say I'm a little more optimistic in regards to the huge costs for next year than I was it 4 weeks ago when we last met? I think it was shorter than that. This is an early meeting. So that's good news. Just to use this as an opportunity to talk about fiscal 20. Fiscal 20 has continued to be exceptionally challenging. I mentioned to you, I think last month, if not the month before, that the preliminary school choice numbers were not looking good. They've been finalized. We have 42 new students choicing out that were not choiced out last year. That almost close to doubled the number of students choicing out. We've never seen an uptick like that. We're almost, relatively speaking, we're about level, number of students coming in, number of students going out. I'm in the process of unpacking the why now. There's about a dozen students who we knew about. There's stories behind each of those students. Some of them we fully understand, some of them we still don't agree, but we at least know the story behind that. There's about 10 students who haven't sat in Triton seats for several years, ranging from an exit date of 2010 to 2017. We don't know where those students went. They unenrolled from us back at those dates. They haven't been in any of our schools for at least 2 years. And then the most concerning piece is 19 students that have never existed in our database. So almost half of those new 42 students have never been a student at Triton in the Triton Regional School District. So easy explanation is those students lived in another town, Amesbury, for example, moved over into one of our member towns, and Amesbury kept them on school choice. So if that was done legally, then okay. If other districts are not following the school choice process, which we have very strictly, we know we take applications all spring and then have a cutoff on the last day of school to make assignments for the next school year, then we do another kind of batch. We rarely accept any students, but another batch through the holidays for a January 1st start. There's very explicit requirements across the state about how school choice students can be accepted. If they're accepting those students and there isn't a list of people that they're saying no to, then it is what it is. We have to figure out why. But if students are not being accepted legally and are just being allowed to stay in a district if they move into one of our member towns, then I'm going to unfortunately have to make a stink with my friends in neighboring districts. I'm hoping that's not the case, but the reality is if, an increase of 42 students is unlike anything we've ever seen. So we're trying to unpack that and dig into why that is. But if those students are being registered in other districts legally, then there's nothing we can do. So what that does, that's a real time, right? That's a fiscal 20 number. That puts us in deficit another about $210,000 for those students who weren't anticipated, who were leaving, that we didn't anticipate. There's also a deficit, a loss of about $100,000 in choice students, the receipts coming in. Based on the way Michelle had that budgeted, there's probably a buffer in that revolving account that will account for that change. We often lose students, and that's more of an unknown. But again, kids coming in is a revolving receipt. Kids going out is a general fund charge, so that's in that 9,000 series. So that line was showing, I forget, the last finance subcommittee meeting was showing about a $50,000 overage, I believe, or deficit. That will now show $207,000 in change as far as a deficit. So since that time, last we spoke, we were talking about deficits in special education of 400, 500,000. I believe, hopefully, that too is improving. As we go through the year, there've been some move-outs. So all that to say, as we're going through this process, yes, Michelle is now gone and doing well in Marblehead, but we have Dave Jack in 2 days a week. He's been in every day this week except for today, and Amy Posick and Karen Denon, and we're trying to unpack this with Sandy and Dave. But I think the numbers for special education are actually a little better than we anticipated. But now we have the school choice. The other piece of information is we received today our excess and deficiency certification at $417,133. So that is our only rainy day fund. We don't have a stabilization account in general. We don't have a transportation stabilization account, which we could, and we don't have a special education stabilization account. All three of those are accounts we could establish. We don't have them now, which means our only rainy day fund is excess and deficiency. So obviously, if we're talking about a deficit that goes beyond $417,000, we have no choice but to do something about that. We either have to not spend dollars we have or make cuts. My hope is that we're not to the making cuts point, but definitely we've had a budget freeze. I think Michelle, I believe she reported that to you before she left, right? Which means that would have been the November meeting when that budget freeze, it was her parting gift, as she noted. Not her fault. So we've been frozen, only emergency spending, and certainly that can recoup some funds. But by the same token, if we get to the end of the year and we deplete this excess and deficiency, then we literally have zero resources should an emergency happen. So that's a brief update to tell you that this will all go. The plan is working with Dave and Amy and Karen when we have the finance subcommittee on the 22nd. Actually, all three of them will be there, and we'll be able to give you a good snapshot, give the finance subcommittee a good snapshot about the true deficit for fiscal 20 and a plan about how we're going to close that gap. Is that fair and depressing enough?
Dina?
Brian, I'm glad you mentioned or gave a little bit better explanation about the school choice, because that was one of the questions I had noted to ask that was listed, as you had mentioned, in the finance subcommittee. When are we going to have a clearer picture of, you said you're still looking into this. When are we going to have more definite answers or a clearer picture of the why? And is this happening from one particular town? Years ago, it happened in Raleigh, but now that we have, Newberry is also a neighboring town, so to speak. Raleigh's really, or Salisbury, well, I guess it could happen in all three of them, really.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
So-
are we finding that? Is it happening in all three, or is it concentrated?
So the 19 students that have never set foot in our schools, 4, I want to say 12 are choiced out of Salisbury. I want to say 4 from Newbury and 5 from Raleigh, if I'm thinking of my color coding that I was showing you today.
Yes, that's what you told me.
That would be too much, because that's more than 19. 12 plus, I think it's 4 and 3. 12 from Salisbury, 4 from Rowley, 3 from Newbury, if I'm not mistaken. It's 19 total that have never set foot in the district. There's another, remember, 10 students that weren't on the roster last year and weren't in our schools last year, and then another dozen who weren't on the roster last year, but were in our schools, and we know the story. So the dozen we know the story. There's nothing else to dig up. The information is on the, roughly 32 students who were not with us last year and don't know the story. Again, the most concerning being the 19 who we literally have nothing on. So we're in the process of proving out, with our investigator, we're proving out the residences of those students to make sure that they actually reside within the Triton schools, within one of our 3 towns. If they truly exist, they truly live and they can prove residency within our member towns, then it's a matter of learning the story and whether or not they were accepted legally. I would say to you, we may never know, right? I will do my best to find out the information, though.
I guess my concern is, I want to get ahead of this. I don't want to see a
Absolutely.
repeat of what we had years ago of being in a tremendous deficit. I mean, we have a lot of great programming here, great students, great faculty. I just don't want that to be the issue. And if it's something else, we need to identify it and work to solve that problem too.
I agree with you unequivocally, and this kills no one more than me, because this is something since 2008 when we made a concerted effort to say, Triton is where you want to be, and to have reversed the numbers of 273 students leaving and only 113 coming in. So rather than being a 2-to-1 ratio out, we had a 2-to-1 ratio in. And now to be even's not even cool, right? And so, part of this is and we've talked about this, we've made a very deliberate decision to not accept new choice students as much as we were. Districts who are accepting choice students as a blanket rule often find themselves in troubling situations. We don't know, and we can't legally know the background on the students we're accepting via choice. On top of that, it's a false sense of hope and revenue. So students just through natural attrition may fall off of your choice roster, and then those funds disappear with them. So we got very reliant on that as a revenue source, and that was great. We had the revenue, but it's not a bad thing to not have the revenue. And it's also, we're still breaking even, right? So that's not a bad thing. I just still don't like it because there's more students leaving the district, right? So what I've said all in the past couple of years is we always need to have at least enough students to be offsetting the students who are out. I was assuming that we would just drop the students in to match the number of students out. I wasn't prepared to double the number of students out.
The last question is, and I know we talked about this at the end of last year too, we were going to there was discussion when Christopher was here about doing an exit interview with school choice parents, and that was going to be in the works again. Was that in place?
Yep, that was actually last year we did
Okay.
that, and I reached out to every family. I had probably, I think, 3 in-person meetings, maybe another 5 calls with folks who were interested in talking. I mean, the reality is there's a lot of, not a lot, there are several families who have always choiced out and will continue. So when we see the name on the list and it's the 7th child in the family, there's no story there.
Right.
Or if there was a student in IEP and there was a challenging situation and the parent chooses to choice because there's a program in another district, there's no need to make those calls. But when I didn't know and when we didn't know the story, I did reach out. So absolutely, once we prove these people exist as residents, I will be just shy of knocking on doors.
Thank you.
Yes.
Deb?
Having lived through the same thing, a lot of the questions that Dina asked, I would have asked also, but you said initially that you've never seen anything like this. So is this worse than what we went through when everybody from Raleigh moved to Ipswich?
So, no. So those numbers, I want to say the number was 52.
Because that was
Right.
really
So,
bad. So when you
yes.
said that, I was very concerned because.
So I think, how do I say? So the difference is there was a single impetus for that
Yes.
exodus. sound like I'm talking from the Bible. That we knew the story behind that exodus. We don't know the story behind, and from what I can see, even looking on the addresses of these students, it's not from a single area. There's new housing, the YWCA housing in Salisbury. I thought maybe that's, this family's being placed in there in need, and that's nope, none of them from there. So it's not. I was looking for any kind of story. So I think that's my comment about I've never seen anything like this before. It's this number of students, 42 new students, without any single factor that we can point to.
Sometimes memory is a little vague, but I think at the time, I know that was, we knew that was, we saw that one coming. But I also think that we, and I'm not quite sure who we was at the time, I remember being involved in it, actually had ad hoc subcommittee meeting type of thing to try and figure out anything we could about it. And I don't know if that is something that at some point I know it's budget season and that's a tough time to do anything extra, but going forward, I think it might be worth a discussion, even if it is a smaller group off to the side some other time.
Absolutely. So the reality is this won't change this year. No, I take that back. This won't change currently. These numbers are born out of the SIMS process, the student information submittals that happen in January. I'm sorry, no, I can't do months. In October 1st, and then are certified in December. That's when we got this. And then there's another, Maureen's doing all these rosters for other districts now. There's another student attending children's report in January. SIMS happens again in March, and then SIMS happens again in June. So that final count in June adjusts the overall choice roster for the school year. So that final choice payment for students coming in, or the final charge, is adjusted on that June 30th receipt or payment. I don't know of any kids that have changed yet, but my guess is there's always changes from September to March to June, and there are kids who come back. The list, that preliminary list to the list that got certified, if you will, in December, there were several kids who were on it and then came off of it. There were several kids who came back over the course of last spring, who were off of it at this point last year and then came back on in the spring. There were also kids that went out. So it changes throughout. So the recourse isn't something we'd be able to say, go back and fix it. The recourse is something that we'd be able to fix moving forward. All that to say, the deficit that it adds is a reality we have to live with and figure out.
Gina?
I just want to make a comment to piggyback off of the questions that Dina asked that I was going to ask too, and that in your research, will we be able to know once I think this is really important, I think it's something that we should stay on top of, but will we be able to know what towns they moved from as well? Because I'd be interested in that. And the only thing that I can say just in my experience in the past 2 years and what I've seen in people moving into the district in our 3 towns is that there are families moving in from other towns where our towns are more affordable, and based on school rankings alone, they just don't believe in Triton. So I know we talk a lot about not comparing ourselves to other districts and focusing on what we're good at, and obviously we all know there are a lot of wonderful things happening within our district, but the reality is that we now live in a culture and a society where everything's a review and rankings. So if you know nothing about Triton and you go online and you're comparing us to Masco, Newburyport, Georgetown, Hamilton, Wenham, unfortunately we don't hold a flame. So when you have people even moving from out of state or from other parts of the state, and they look at that. So I mean, that's just an uphill battle that I think we'll have to continuously face, but I personally think that is part of it too, which all we can do is, continue doing the best that we can. I mean, I work with buyers that are not from around here, and they'll just pick towns based on school rankings. And I have to drill down and have a deeper conversation in terms of what that means with them, because they have no idea. It's just based on numbers.
So if you look at DESE and compare us, Triton's in the running. If you look at greatschools.com,
right,
which is
what they're
associated
looking
with
at.
every Zillow and Redfin,
Right.
it's ridiculous. And
Yeah.
if you look at the way they compute those scores, and it's not a real picture. But
Right.
the power of media.
Right.
they sell it.
Right.
So, I mean, it certainly speaks to, the efforts we are making with marketing and PR, and it certainly argues for full-time marketing person, right? We've talked about this. It's like, how as an educational institution do you argue to say we need a full-time marketing, PR person? It doesn't compute with public education, but as a regional school, it's a reality.
Well, and
any school.
the other reality is too, with all the social media groups that are online, when we're in town groups and people are complaining about this and that, that's where a lot of prospective buyers are going to get their information, where they don't have the context of those conversations. So I think looking into it's really important and trying to get ahead of it to turn it. That's all.
I'm just going to make a comment that if, lately, there's been so many great things on Triton's social media about all the things that are happening in our schools, and I wish there was a way to, have real estate agents sharing that with, with their clients, that if they're looking at the Triton schools, check out their social media, because I'm following all of the different schools, and every day I see some great stuff. There was a video today out of the middle school about middle school students, and there's just so much out there now, more so than there ever was even just 5 years ago, so.
Yeah, and kudos to the principals and assistant principals. Principals and assistant principals don't become that to be social media gurus, and they're trying, right? I mean, their first instinct is to do their work with kids and teachers, but they're all trying to show it, right? Because that's where people go. So I think they're doing, to your point, they're doing a great job, and Ketty is now trying to make sure that anything from the schools then gets pushed out, right, beyond. So someone might follow the district, but not the high school because they have a kiddo at the elementary level, and to push that out at the district level too. So it's a lot of work living on social media.
Yeah.
Right, Narissa?
Well, I think they're doing a great job, because I've seen so much lately. Also, I just sort of a shout out to the school paper, the high school paper
Yeah.
is putting out some
Yeah.
great papers, if that can be shared somehow. And the I don't know, what's it called, the weekly Triton
VTV?
BTV, yeah. I watch it every week now.
Yeah.
It's a great way to learn about what's going on in the schools, and they're not only talking about the high school, but they're also talking about the elementary schools and
And
middle
it's
schools.
entertaining.
And it is entertaining. They're some pretty talented kids.
Some very talented kids. They like to push the envelope, and that's good, right? Teach us all to relax a little bit. It's okay to poke fun at ourselves, but it is. It's phenomenal stuff happening.
Any other questions? Comments? I'll just, Brian kind of glossed over this, but we'll also have state numbers for the 25th. They officially announced that the State of the Commonwealth will be the night of the 21st, which means that the governor's budget will be coming out the 22nd. So we'll have our foundation enrollment numbers. We're going to have the preliminary Chapter 70 numbers. We'll have the number minimum local contributions that we'll need for the assessment calculations. All that'll come out. So we'll have all that in advance of the 25th as well.
So on the 25th, we'll be able to we'll make some assumptions, a placeholder for, the big unknown is the contract negotiations. So we can put a placeholder in and show you what a level service is, what that will mean for an overall bottom line, in assessments to towns. And then along with that, we'll do the traditional looking at the prioritized list of all the requests that the principals and other administrators make. Okay.
All right. Sorry, but you're still up. So monthly report of the superintendent of schools. Yeah, we skipped.
So thankfully, it was a quick holiday season, so it's a short report. So just a reminder on the budget process. As far as school business administrator, that process took a long time. It bled into the holidays. Deb was the representative from the finance subcommittee. We arrived at 2 finalists, both very, very talented and qualified candidates. Brought those folks back again, some further conversations. I did some extensive reference checks, and I would say more like conversations than just pure reference checks, and ultimately made a decision for one of those finalists based on who I think will fit best for Triton. So we were in a great place to have 2 candidates. I don't know if you agree or disagree, Deb, 2 candidates who were incredibly highly qualified and both would have done a phenomenal job in the role, and we were able to select. So I'm not going to say any names tonight because that's not public information, but that we're going to have a discussion at PNN on Friday, correct? And then my hope is to bring to you next Thursday a recommendation to hire this individual. My hope is to put it on the agenda that we'll put out on Friday, and so the name will be there. And then have that discussion Thursday night with a motion for you to authorize me to sign a contract for this next person. If we follow that timeline, we would be able to have this person in place by February 3rd and begin a transition of Dave Jack out over a couple weeks. And then the goal would be to keep him on half a day a week, just to continue that, the knowledge that he's built since Michelle left, keep that, and then wean that out over time. So we ensure we have a really successful transition for this next person.
Go ahead, Deb.
Everybody on the interview committee was unanimous in these, with
Yeah.
what Brian said about the two people that were brought forward.
Yeah, so everyone thought they both would be phenomenal in the role, in which, again, it's not, as I mentioned last month, we did not have a huge candidate pool. There are times we've had a candidate pool of 40 and didn't arrive at two people who we thought could do the job. So to have a smaller candidate pool and still to have two incredibly qualified candidates, it turned out very well. So I'm excited that we'll be able to, and hope we'll be able to move this process along so that we can transition this person in successfully. Any questions on that?
Okay, I just wanted to make a quick comment on that, and apologies to the committee. Normally, we don't have something like this coming in on one of the budget night meetings, so this is an exception. When Brian came to me and asked me about it, the main reason for this is timing. Obviously, with us being in the middle of budget season already, it would be optimal to have this person be involved in as much as possible. So in that, Brian was very certain the committee was behind both of these candidates, and either one of them was clearly a good choice based on the entire committee. I didn't feel like this was rushing things, but I did feel like in the interest of having this be timely, because in our conversations, even though this person would be starting, at the beginning of February, there would be meetings beforehand that this person could attend. It made sense to bring this into a fairly unusual meeting as an agenda item to make sure that, we're kind of optimizing the time that we have, given where we are right now.
Yeah, just say it. So it was attempted to try and get it for tonight. It was just with the process. I took my time and due diligence. So it didn't happen for tonight. So rather than waiting until February 5th or 12th, that was the goal.
Dina?
That's one question. How many people were in the initial pool?
10.
10, and whittled down to two strong ones.
So interviewed 4. These 2 emerged as, like Deb said.
Right, but two.
Everyone,
very strong.
9 of us, everyone said either one of them we would be very comfortable with either one of them.
Good.
Yep. So we should say too, so it's not on the agenda officially as posted for Friday, but it's, did we post? Yeah, we posted that, right?
Yeah.
We posted that. Poor Maureen. Can we say she's doing a great job trying to learn this whole process? Your agendas, let me just tell you.
I can do more than agendas.
That's right. So far, we're just good with agendas. So it's not on the agenda, but we'll take that up as an option. It's not, I can tell you right now, the contract that I would be proposing is a very standard administrative contract, and it's within the hiring range that the PNN committee set with the job description. So I think it's good to have a PNN discussion, but it would then come to you. The big discussion would be with all of you as the committee, and that candidate would be sitting here at the table. And you would have an opportunity to ask that candidate some questions. Not an interview, but you would have that opportunity to ask some questions.
And just to confirm, since Brian just made the comment that it's not on Friday's agenda, this would fall into the unanticipated issues that come up within that very short time frame after posting, because it was literally this afternoon that we were having this conversation that said, why are we waiting until February? Because that doesn't make sense.
School administrator hire. So just a quick note on that. That's a Triton Pentucket Newburyport partnership. that we're coordinating with Salem State, right?
Yes.
For it's a CAGS, so someone who has a master's can do a CAGS in educational leadership. And I love the idea of partnering with our neighboring districts rather than only competing. So it's working with Salem State to hopefully home grow future leaders for Triton in our surrounding area, mostly for Triton.
Can I ask one question for that? Is there any cost to the district for doing this? So it's just an opportunity for our teachers?
It's mostly, so generally, schools, Leslie, Salem State will, Gordon, any of them will reach out and offer, and try and get enough of an interest, and if they have enough of an interest, so if no one signed up, they wouldn't run the program, or if 2 people, they probably wouldn't, because they're running as a satellite program. So individuals pay for whatever the program costs are and emerge with the degree completely at their cost. Good question, though. And the last item there, the bolts, the safety bolts that were approved at the May town meeting for Newbury were installed at NES over the holiday break. Again, these are the locks that allow for a single push to bolt the door, and then when you leave, it automatically unlocks the bolt, similar to a hotel deadbolt. So just to clarify, that's Newbury Elementary, Pine Grove in the renovation, those locks were upgraded. That leaves Salisbury Elementary and the middle school, high school, the 2 schools we own as a district. So we are working on a plan to figure out how to do that. 2 other things I wrote myself a note. So you see in the packet on the personnel report, our network administrator, Matt Liakos, resigned to take up a job, I think it's public, I'll let him say, in a neighboring private sector industry. Matt has done some tremendous work over his time here. So I certainly want to thank him for his work, and he has brought us as far as network stability, and he certainly had a passion for information security. So that's something he's done a great job. In our succession planning, Brett, who's been with us for he's been here since 2011, so 9 years, will be transitioning into that role. Another technician, Jeremy, will be kind of transitioning into as the senior technician, and we'll be hiring a new technician. So that position is currently posted, if you looked on School Spring right now. That is open and accepting applications. So I'm very thankful that we had 2 very qualified and very talented individuals remaining behind Matt, and they train as a department, so that there will be hiccups, guaranteed, but it'll be a decent transition. So that happened. And then the third thing I wanted to mention, I mentioned earlier that transportation bids went live on the 2nd, pre-bid tomorrow, opening on the 23rd. So any questions?
Dina?
Sorry, I had one more question on personnel. Janice Kovach, is she retiring or just reduction in teaching because?
She's retiring. Where is she?
Because it normally says names in bold and with an asterisk notes retirements, but she wasn't, and I thought, well, maybe it's just.
Nope, we missed the bold and the asterisk.
All right.
Yes, she is retiring.
Oh, that's too bad.
It is too bad.
I have a question about that one, too. The June 1st separation date, is it just going to be for the last few weeks of school, a substitute?
It would be the last, so that should say the last day of school.
Okay.
Yep,
all
so
right,
she is a
all right.
retiree, and that is, yep.
Through the end of the year.
Okay.
I was going to say, that's a tough time to leave.
Yes, no, that's, yes, I can guarantee that is the case. And most retirees, we ask them, they can write what they want, to resign effective the end of the school year. So that way, if their 183rd day is June 14th, great. If it's June 28th, like it was a couple of years ago.
Can we just get one, though, that which she's leaving in February?
I don't know.
Yeah.
So we'll put that we'll do that in the February
Yeah.
report. Yep.
Any other questions
Any
or
other
comments? Superintendent's report? No takers? All right. Back to you again.
We'll talk about
Yep.
Since, excuse me, Narissa, but since it says to receive, consider, and
Oh, yes,
file, we
sorry.
need to vote.
My bad. Yes. Can I get a motion to receive, review, and file, oh, no, wait. Receive, consider, and file the report of the superintendent of schools, please.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Unanimous? All right. Moving on to your goal-setting update, please.
So we can make this brief. I know it's getting late. The first goal, actually, Kim mentioned earlier in regards to offering advanced opportunities. We certainly have talked a long time and a lot about providing supports for the students who need additional supports, and focusing our attention on students who need advancement, students who need advanced coursework, advanced opportunities. That's obviously much easier at the middle school and high school when we're offering courses versus interventions and other opportunities at the elementary level. So I can't report to you any changes that are in effect for the end of the year or for next year, but there have been discussions, and most notably, Kim mentioned at the middle school in regards to continuing to tweak the changes since the schedule was put into place. And then we've had some discussions in addition about do there need to be further tweaks to the schedule that would improve both the middle school and the high school, not just to allow the sharing of resources, but just to provide opportunities for students. So that is still an ongoing work. Again, I don't have anything specific to share with you other than the conversations are happening. The second goal was about recruiting and hiring. I think I've given you several updates. Hire number 1 is sitting to my left. Hire number 2 we just talked about. So those are both in process or completed. And then the district technology plan, the district technology committee met. It's not the district, whatever the group is. It's a working group, trying to make it a little different. Met last night. I was not able to attend, but trying to rethink how we look at technology. We have for years and decades created a technology plan that talks about number of devices and access and Wi-Fi capabilities. We don't ever talk about why. We don't talk about the need for use of and teaching kids how to use technology. So the hope is to have by the end of this year a blueprint, if you will. The exact format is not determined, but we've arrived with that group is it'll be framed around the ISTE standards of what we want our students to be able to do in regards to technology, and we've got them listed there as an empowered learner, a digital citizen, a knowledge constructor, innovative designer, computational thinker, creative communicator, and global collaborator. So it really gives you a nice perspective of this isn't about the devices, this is about how we can use technology and send our students forward into the world prepared to be contributing citizens and effective. So it will absolutely get to devices. It will absolutely get to the need for how we fund those, the personnel. Kim Patrick and I had a lively discussion this morning about we're ready to do this right now, but there's this planning that has to happen. So you'll see some proposals in the budgets, both at the district level and at the high school level, about specific technology people that are needed to start that transition to move us towards using technology effectively. People are fighting over the Chromebooks we have, but it's not just about the devices, it's about how we use them. So more on that, but I believe that plan will hopefully paint the picture for you and allow you to support the need to spend money on technology. Because the numbers to put devices in hands is not as bad as it used to be. And they're not formidable numbers as they once were. But we have to have a plan in place so that you can confidently believe that we're putting the money to the right things. So that plan would be presented to you before the end of the school year as well. Any questions?
Paul?
Brian, just on the first goal, it talks about more opportunities for students. And rather than looking at course offerings, I want to know how are seventh grade teachers trying to assess students that as they go to eighth grade really shouldn't be in a Spanish class, for instance, Spanish 1, they should be in a Spanish 2 or a Spanish 3. Are the seventh grade teachers trying to identify, the half a dozen or a dozen students who really are truly gifted so that we can use that better schedule that we have now to get those kids in better educational opportunities? Because you don't want to see those kids that are really, really advanced sitting in an eighth grade Spanish class if they could be in something else. I mean, is there a way to identify them? Are the teachers kind of honing in on that, or?
So I would say to you right now, no, because we don't have the structure and the resources to be able to do that. So
But I don't mean for new course offerings. I mean just to target the seventh kid that are moving into the eighth grade. So at the end of the year, they say, these 5 kids really don't belong in an eighth grade level class in this course, whatever that is. And let's try to shift them into.
So that happened this year in mathematics. So there are 4 students who would have been in 7th grade math who are taking 8th grade math. So they're taking algebra, pre-algebra, right? So they should have.
Algebra.
They're taking algebra.
They're actually they skipped 7th grade, and now they're in 8th grade.
Right, so they're 7th grade students
Taking the advanced class.
taking the algebra class. So next year, we have to have something for them to be able to take. So is it happening? Not nearly enough, but it's starting.
Yeah, no, but I mean, it's moving.
It's a mindset.
Yeah, and can I mention too that I'm really excited about, actually, I'm excited about a lot of things, but for tonight and the time, I'm going to focus on a couple. One is that the STAMP assessment is the assessment, the foreign language or world language assessment that we are using to identify and provide the seal of biliteracy. I talked about it in a couple meetings ago. So that assessment can be used starting at 2nd grade, and it's adaptive, and it's based on the newer standards, the world language standards. So we could potentially use that assessment for purposes of what you're just talking about, where if we have a 7th grade student who excels in even world languages. Now we have, for $20 cost to us, we can have that child participate in that online assessment and easily get a sense of where that child is. Very similar to what we use the iReady reading assessment for. So this year, for the first time, when we met with the ELA teachers and we looked at their standards and what grade level they were somewhat placed at, we said, okay, you have 4 students who are reading at a 9th grade level, and this is a 7th grader. What are you going to do to challenge that student, right? So I have to say, with the implementation of these new benchmark assessments that scale up or scale down, and there's no ceiling per se, we have a better ability to see where these kids are, both at both ends, and then adjust curriculum, pull in some more coursework, and we have the resources in the sense where we know where that student is. We're not just saying, well, he gets 100. Like, we actually know where that ceiling is for that child. So I'm feeling very optimistic that as we get into the schedule discussions and opportunities, we can look at the profile of our students to say where there is a certain need and go in that direction with resources. So.
Kim, can you also speak a little bit about how you're going to integrate that into the 6th graders coming into 7th grade and the thought process behind what you're going to do with them also?
So I can at least speak to the math, and in the sense where we're looking to use the iReady math benchmark, where we've had schools pilot it in the past. Again, we do the reading piece of it, so you'll see some of that in the elementary, in the budgets from the principals, and even at the middle school level. So thinking about looking at the state assessment for MCAS, and this is just math, looking at an iReady score, because the iReady, the score alone doesn't give you enough information, but it's aligned with the standards. So we want to make sure, and that's what the state is also cautioning people to jump people above 2 different courses. They don't want kids to get to the highest level and then realize they've missed all this curriculum, right? So we want to make sure that we have the students in the right course and that they are ready to be there, because the standards are solid with those particular students. So for math, we're looking at those particular assessments to get a good profile of the student as one option. That discussion is going to take place, I think it's either next week or the week after that, where we pull the middle school math teachers together, the math specialist. As far as ELA, that's a different beast, but we do have an ELA curriculum meeting coming up as well, and we can unpack some of that then.
So can you explain how far down into the elementary school levels you're doing this consideration also?
So for right now, we're looking at the transitional grades, but I can tell you, even through Math in Focus, there are a lot of opportunities to accelerate learning for those kids, and that's one of the reasons why this program was chosen, because we felt like it had enough resources within the program itself to provide opportunities for kids to excel. And because they are using those opportunities, by the time they reach sixth grade, they're fairly advanced even for that seventh grade curriculum. So that's where I think that's the most important piece of that transitional aspect, where we're seeing kids now that we certainly are very confident can excel to acceptable levels, but without sacrificing their understanding of the standards. So does that make sense? Like, I honestly have not heard from any math specialists or teachers that they are experiencing kids in fourth or fifth grade that have mastered all of the standards and the practices. And if there is a one or two student that does pop up, we will certainly have them assessed on the math, the benchmark, the Math iReady, to make sure that those standards are really solid. And then within the school, they will adjust or find a way to accommodate, just like they would on the other end of the spring. So, yeah. I know that wasn't short, but.
Any other comments, questions? All right. Excellent.
I have no place to judge.
Yes. Can I get a motion to receive, review, and file? That was
Kim's doing my goals. This works out perfectly.
the superintendent's 2019-2020 mid-year goals progress update, please.
So moved. I'll second it.
Get a second? Yeah. Any further discussion? All in favor? All right, unanimous. And moving into subcommittee reports and action items, policy and advocacy, Linda?
Yes, our committee is brainstorming, coming up with a letter to send out to the same group of school districts that we sent out information about how much money that the Student Act was going to actually give to a lot of the communities. What we're doing is the Student Opportunity Act came out, and they're creating commissions. And one of them is the declining enrollment in charter schools in the rural schools. So what we're doing is coming up with a letter that helps people to change the narrative of that the declining enrollment doesn't affect your budgets, which they do. We all know that they do. So we're coming up with a draft letter to send out, and we're hoping to have it completed by next Wednesday. So we'll share that with everybody in the coming days.
So we're gonna post a meeting for next Wednesday
Yes,
before the 6 o'clock, so we have 5:30 meeting for a quick meeting to finalize that letter.
right.
And we could even pass out drafts. Wouldn't be on the agenda for the 6 o'clock meeting, but just to get you a copy.
Right, because we just want people to have something so that it's a boilerplate of what they can say to their legislators, their selectmen, their towns, so that everybody's talking about the same thing, so that when this commission gets completed, everybody has the same information.
All right, finance? Deb?
You have all our reports in your packet, and I think everything that we covered in finance has been touched on tonight already in multiple ways. So our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, January 22nd.
All right. And PNN, Paul? Can we just redact everything that you are going to say right now?
Okay, well, that's
We
fine.
get those minutes and yes.
So
It's black.
we are in ongoing discussions with the TRTA about contract negotiation. I'd like to ask, Madam Chair, if we can set aside 20 to 30 minutes in one of the upcoming meetings, either the workshop or even the budget meetings next week, to go into executive session. Brian, I'd like to go over with the balance of the committee the direction of some of what's gone on in the negotiations, so that they have an idea, and also to discuss the placeholder that you've talked about, obviously. But I'd really like to talk about the substance of what we've accomplished in the discussions so far.
Yep.
Just the topics.
Yep.
And our next meeting is Friday morning.
So do you
PNN.
want to talk about when you want to do that executive session?
I was going to say, we could, yeah.
I would say ideally if you schedule it before or after the posted meeting.
Whatever you decide. I just wanted to bring it up to discuss it. You know, the chair and Brian, you can talk about it.
Okay. Is there particular timing, or, I mean, we could schedule it for the beginning of the Saturday session if we wanted to do that. Other than that, we could put it before one of the meetings next week. We are not at this point intending to take advantage of the optional school committee meeting that I'm forgetting the word.
The tentative?
It's been a long day, the tentative school committee meeting. Yeah, the one at the end, toward the end of the month. We're not intending to take advantage of that right now, so it would be the 25th or sometime next week.
Or the end of the Saturday workshop?
Yep.
You know.
Okay.
I was going to say either that, or if you wanted to do it sooner, I would just say this. So it's going to be timely in regards to if there is guidance you can give us, right? That's an executive session because of strategy. If there's guidance you can give us, we can come to the Saturday workshop with that guidance generally figured into the budget. So not to add to next week, but if I was going to say, so Tuesday, we're starting at 6. Wednesday, there's a meeting before. Thursday, I'm proposing we're adding, I think there's bigger district discussions, and I'm adding the appointment of the business administrator. Monday, I'm sorry, we're not doing Monday. Tuesday, sorry, are the 3 elementary schools. My guess is that that would probably be the quickest night. So if you could do it after, I know you're not going to be here Tuesday, right?
Yeah, but you can't go anyway.
Oh, that's right, you're not, right, so
Can't go, yeah.
Deb and Erin still can't be part of that executive session. And oh, that's right, we lose a third of the committee. So if we could do it, if we did it Tuesday, you know, if we're starting at 6, you know, we might be doing an executive session at 7:30, and then it's just not to return to open session, and you can just end the meeting that way. It's a little easier. If it takes you 10 minutes, great. If it takes you 30 minutes, fine. So does that sound like a plan?
All right, but you said takes me that time. It's going to be your presentation, my friend.
You tell me what to, absolutely, you concede, it'll be an hour and a half, so your choice. So do you want to do that? So we'll post it on the Tuesday agenda. We'll post the 3 elementary presentations and then the executive session afterwards. Not to return to open session.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, probably, except for Thursday. All right, so I guess that's it. Correspondence is in your packet. I don't think there's anything earth-shattering there, so.
I just had one question, I'm sorry, about the consortium report.
Yep.
How many students do we have from Triton going there to use those programs? It was hard to determine that in the information. Looked like it was less than 20?
This is North Shore. This is North Shore, yeah, Crest is a smaller group.
Looks like it's hard to determine here. It's just,
So this is last year's report too.
oh, okay.
So it's
All
a
right,
year
that
in
makes a
arrears,
difference.
so it's just like our annual report was
Right, so-
18, 19?
Okay, I get it. So it's less than last year? We have less students going this year than we did last year?
No.
Last year it looked to be about 18, 19
So
maybe?
also, so you're looking at the numbers on the
It's on that bar graph,
no, that's not a percentage.
7, page 7,
Yeah, so that looks like it's, upper teens,
right.
which, so, and I'm not sure exactly how they count. So we could have, I'm not sure if I'm on, we could have students who are there in a long-term placement. We could have students who are there in a 45-day placement. So I'm not sure in those numbers.
How that
I'm
breaks
assuming
down.
they're counting every student, whether they were receiving services only, a 45-day short-term assessment, or they were in one of the annual year-round programs.
Out of curiosity, could we have that information for the budget workshop, that Saturday workshop? I'm curious, since this ties into special education and all of that, that's, I think, pertinent information that I'd like to have.
I just pulled apart my budget binder from last year, and I'm pretty sure that was in David's presentation last
Okay,
year.
all right.
So you're talking about numbers?
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Are you talking about like actually interested in numbers in each To like each placement or numbers of like type of placements?
Type of placements,
Okay,
yeah.
because David has
just-
always presented that.
But I mean, just even how many students we have, I'm curious as to, there's so many different programs that are offered, and I'm curious as to what programs in particular we are really utilizing.
So again, at North Shore, whatever, the 7 programs at North Shore, and then there's programs at Crest Collaborative, or do you want to know for, whatever, call it 40 students, the location and the program they're in?
We'll make it simple and say yes.
Because they're all over the place. Okay. So obviously, we're not going to give you student names, but we can give you
No,
totals.
exactly, just
Yeah.
curious as to
Yep.
where and what.
Yep.
Thank you.
I have it right here, but I'd say I can get to the exact number, but it is around 10.
Okay,
That are currently at North Shore?
Yeah, from elementary through their high schools. But I can get you the exact number, so.
all right, thank you.
So, yeah, so we'll, for Saturday, that Saturday workshop, yes. We can do a listing of, Dave, you can do that. So it's a listing of, obviously not student names, but just number of kids at North Shore, is that Embark? I always get Crest and North Shore. That's a Crest program. You know, the Recovery High School, North Shore program, 2 students. Absolutely. We can do that.
Okay, any further questions on correspondence? And just real quick, this made me think of it. Brian shared with me today that the materials for next week will be what you get hard copy. The binders will not be included because they don't fit anywhere.
Yes, in your mailboxes or your doors. So you'll get a folder with, again, we're still shooting for lots of copying and hole punching, and we haven't even given them to Maureen yet. Finalizing all the budgets, so you have Monday, I'm sorry, it's not Monday, I keep saying that. It's Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday's presentations. You'll get all delivered on Friday in an envelope, and then we'll give you the binder with the tabs when you arrive on Tuesday. And then you can set up your binder, and then you've got everything you need for all 3 nights. I can feel the vibration over here, the excitement.
Ready.
The binder love.
Binder lady.
Did I get that on microphone? Oh.
That's fine, that's
You kidding me? Give her an extra set.
All right, so 6 o'clock on Tuesday.
Retirement gift.
See you here. It'll be fun, I promise. Yes. Yep. Can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
Motion
I'll
adjourned.
make I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? All right, thank you. See you Tuesday.